Millionaire visits childhood sweetheart and is shocked to discover she is still a virgin. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She shouldn't have called him, but she did. The rain drummed against the hospital window, like fingers tapping out an anxious rhythm. Jonathan Hale stood motionless in the sterile hallway, his Armani suit a stark contrast to the worn linoleum beneath his Italian leather shoes. At 36, he commanded boardrooms and moved millions with a single phone call, but right now, he felt like a lost child. His phone buzzed. Another urgent message from his assistant about the Tokyo deal. He silenced it, without looking. "Mr. Hale?" A nurse with kind eyes approached him. "Your mother is asking for you." Jonathan straightened his shoulders, the gesture automatic after years of projecting strength he didn't always feel. His mother lay small and fragile against the white sheets, her once vibrant auburn hair now silver threads against the pillow. When she saw him, her face lit up with that same smile that had sent him off to his first day of school 30 years ago. "Jonathan." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You came." "Of course I came, Mum." He pulled a chair close to her bedside, his throat tight. "You know I'd drop everything for you." She reached for his hand with fingers that felt like paper. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to say yes." Jonathan's chest clenched. He'd built an empire on calculated risks, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. "Anything. I want to go home. To Millbrook. I want to see the old house one more time. Walk through the garden where you used to play." Her eyes searched his face. "Will you take me there?" Millbrook, the small town in upstate New York where he'd grown up, where life moved at the pace of seasons instead of stock markets. He hadn't been back in 15 years, not since he'd left for Colombia, with dreams bigger than the town could contain. "Mom, the doctors said..." "The doctors said a lot of things." Her grip on his hand surprisingly firm. "But they can't give me what I really need. Time with my son in the place where we were happiest." Jonathan felt something crack inside his chest. Success had taught him to measure everything in profit margins and quarterly reports. But sitting here, looking at the woman who'd raised him alone after his father died, none of that mattered. "Okay," he said softly. "We'll go home." 3 days later, Jonathan's black Tesla moved through the familiar streets of Millbrook like a sleek predator in a world of pickup trucks and mom-and-pop shops. The town hadn't changed much. Main Street still looked like a postcard from the 1950s, with its red brick buildings and hand-painted signs. But something felt different, smaller somehow. Or maybe he was just seeing it through different eyes. His mother dozed in the passenger seat, peaceful for the first time in weeks. They'd arranged for a private nurse to meet them at the old house, which his mother had kept all these years, renting it out to local families, but never quite able to let it go. As they turned onto Maple Street, Jonathan's breath caught. There it was, the pale yellow Victorian with the wraparound porch, where he'd spent countless summer evenings catching fireflies. The oak tree he'd climbed was still there, though it seemed impossibly smaller now. But it wasn't the house that made his heart stutter. It was the woman standing on the front steps. Even from a distance, he knew that silhouette. The way she held her shoulders, the gentle curve of her neck, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking. 15 years melted away in an instant. Natasha Evans. She was talking to someone on her phone, her free hand gesturing animatedly in that way he remembered so well. She wore a simple sundress the color of summer sky, and her dark skin glowed warm in the afternoon light. Her hair, which had been in neat braids when they were kids, now fell in loose natural curls around her shoulders. She was beautiful, not the polished, artificial beauty of the women in his Manhattan circles, but something deeper, something real. Jonathan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What was she doing here? Did she know he was coming back? As if sensing his gaze, Natasha looked up from her phone call. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment the world went completely still. She ended her call and walked toward the car, her movements graceful and unhurried. Jonathan's heart hammered against his ribs as he parked and stepped out. "Jonathan Hale," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered. Warm honey over smooth stones. "I thought that might be you." Natasha. Her name felt foreign and familiar all at once on his tongue. "What are you—" "Your mother called me yesterday. Asked if I could help get the house ready." She smiled, and it was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "She said you were coming home." Home. The word hit him harder than it should have. New York was where he lived, where he worked, where he'd built his life. But standing here, looking at the girl who'd been his whole world before he'd learned to want more than this small town could offer, Jonathan realized something that shook him to his core. He'd never really left home. He'd just been running from it. And in that moment, she looked at him with those same trusting eyes from their childhood, and he realized what he had lost. Some silences hold more truth than words ever could. Jonathan stood frozen beside his car, watching Natasha's face cycle through emotions he couldn't quite read. Surprise, warmth, something that might have been hurt, and underneath it all, a guardedness that hadn't been there when they were kids. "You look," he started, then stopped. Different seemed inadequate. Beautiful felt too loaded. Exactly like I remembered, and nothing like I expected was probably too honest. "Older?" Natasha supplied with a gentle laugh that made his chest tight. "Yeah, 15 years will do that to a person." "I was going to say wonderful," he said, and meant it. A soft sound from the car reminded him why he was here. His mother stirred, blinking awake with the confusion of someone pulled from deep sleep. "Mum." Jonathan moved quickly to open her door, all thoughts of his own discomfort forgotten. "We're here." Eleanor Hale's eyes brightened as she took in her surroundings. "Oh, my sweet boy, look at it. Still the prettiest house on the street. Mrs. Hale." Natasha approached the car with the same gentle confidence Jonathan remembered from when she'd helped injured birds and befriended every stray cat in the neighborhood. "It's so good to see you." "Natasha, darling." His mother's voice carried more strength than it had in days. "Look at you, just as beautiful as I always knew you'd become." Jonathan watched Natasha's cheeks darken with a blush, the same way they had when his mother used to praise her drawings in art class. Some things apparently never changed. "Let me help," Natasha said, moving to his mother's other side as they slowly made their way up the porch steps. The house smelled like lemon oil and fresh flowers. Natasha had clearly been busy. Every surface gleamed, and vases of wildflowers from the garden sat on the mantel and kitchen table. It looked exactly as Jonathan remembered, down to the family photos on the piano and his mother's collection of ceramic birds on the windowsill. "The nurse should be here within the hour," Natasha said, as they settled his mother in her favorite armchair by the window. "I made sure the bedroom downstairs was ready, and I stocked the kitchen with basics." "You didn't have to do all this," Jonathan said, genuinely moved by her thoughtfulness. "Yes, I did." Natasha's tone was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were soft. "Your mother was good to me when I needed it most. It's the least I can do." When she needed it most. Jonathan filed that away, another piece of the puzzle of what had happened in the years he'd been gone. His mother dozed off again in the afternoon sun, and Jonathan found himself alone with Natasha for the first time in 15 years. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. "Coffee?" Natasha asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "Please." He followed her, noting the easy way she moved through his mother's kitchen, opening cabinets and drawers like she belonged there, like she'd done this before. "You come here often?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Every few weeks, sometimes more if she needs something." Natasha measured coffee with practiced efficiency. "She's stubborn about accepting help, but I've learned to be more stubborn." "Sounds like Mum." Jonathan smiled, then sobered. "Thank you for looking out for her while I was building an empire." Natasha's tone wasn't judgmental, just observational. "I read about you sometimes. Forbes, Wall Street Journal. Jonathan Hale, the boy who conquered New York. Not everything you read is true." "No?" She turned to face him, and he caught a flash of something in her dark eyes. "Which parts were lies? The part about you being worth 9 figures, or the part about the supermodel girlfriend?" Ex-girlfriend, Jonathan thought, but didn't correct her. Veronica had been a mistake, beautiful, accomplished, and completely wrong for him in every way that mattered. Their relationship had been more about appearances than actual connection, which was probably why it had lasted as long as it did. They'd looked good together in photos, and neither of them had wanted anything deeper. "Both, actually," he said instead. "The money's real, but it's not worth as much as people think, and there's no girlfriend. Not anymore." "Ah," Natasha turned back to the coffee maker, but not before he caught what might have been relief flickering across her features. "Well, success suits you. You look polished. Is that a compliment or an accusation?" She laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Can't it be both?" The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence. Jonathan studied her profile, the elegant line of her neck, the way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks, the small scar on her chin from when she'd fallen off her bike, racing him down Miller's Hill. "What about you?" he asked. "Are you happy?" It was a loaded question. and they both knew it. Natasha considered it seriously, the way she'd always considered his questions when they were kids. "Most days," she said finally. "I teach second grade at Millbrook Elementary. I have a little house on Elm Street with a garden that actually grows things. I coach the girls' soccer team on weekends." She paused. "It's a good life, but nothing." Her tone was firm. "Not everything needs a but, Jonathan. Some of us learn to be content with what we have." The words stung more than they should have. Content. Not happy, not fulfilled. Content. Like settling was an achievement. "I didn't mean, I know what you meant." Natasha poured 2 cups of coffee, added cream to both from memory. "You meant, is this enough for someone who used to dream of seeing the world?" She handed him a mug, their fingers brushing for just a moment. The contact sent electricity shooting up his arm, and from the way her breath caught, she felt it too. "Dreams change," she continued, stepping back to a safer distance. "Sometimes what you thought you wanted turns out to be less important than what you already have." Jonathan wanted to ask what had changed her dreams, wanted to know about the years he'd missed, the experiences that had shaped her into this woman who seemed so grounded, so sure of herself. But something in her posture told him those stories weren't his to claim anymore. The front door opened, and voices filled the hallway. The nurse probably come to check on his mother. "I should go," Natasha said, setting down her barely touched coffee. "Let you settle in." "Natasha, wait." The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Could we have dinner? Tomorrow, maybe, to catch up properly." She studied his face for a long moment, and he held his breath. "I don't know if that's a good idea, Jonathan." "Why not?" "Because," she said softly, "some doors are better left closed." And as she walked away, he realized that coming home might be the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. The hardest conversations happen without words. Jonathan couldn't sleep. He'd tried everything, counting sheep, focusing on quarterly reports, even meditation apps his assistant had downloaded for stress management. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Natasha walking away from him in the kitchen, her words echoing like a warning. Some doors are better left closed. At 3 in the morning, he gave up and padded downstairs to check on his mother. The nurse, a capable woman named Ruth, dozed lightly in the chair beside the hospital bed they'd set up in the living room. His mother's breathing was steady, peaceful. For the first time in months, she looked like she wasn't fighting something. Coming home had been the right choice, even if everything else felt complicated. Jonathan made coffee and stepped onto the back porch, surprised to find the morning air crisp despite the summer season. The garden stretched before him, wild and overgrown but somehow perfect in its chaos. He could almost see his 8-year-old self hiding behind the tomato plants, waiting for Natasha to find him during their endless games of hide-and-seek. "Can't sleep either." He turned, heart skipping, to find Natasha at the garden gate. She wore running clothes, simple black leggings and a fitted top that showed off the lean strength of her arms. Her hair was pulled back in a high ponytail, and a light sheen of sweat on her dark skin suggested she'd been running for a while. "Early riser, actually," he said, though they both knew it was a lie. "You?" 5-mile loop around the lake. She opened the gate without invitation, moving into the garden like she belonged there, which, Jonathan realized, she probably did. "Your mother mentioned you used to run track in high school. Sprints, you remember." "I remember a lot of things." Natasha bent to examine the tomato plants, her fingers gentle on the leaves. "These need staking. The weight of the fruit will break the stems otherwise." "You know about gardening too?" "I know about a lot of things you might be surprised by." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. 15 years is a long time to learn new skills. Jonathan studied her profile in the early morning light. There was something different about her today. Less guarded, more like the girl he'd once known. Or maybe that was wishful thinking. "What time do you start work?" 7:30. "Summer school runs shorter days." She glanced at him. "What about you? Don't you have an empire to run?" "I'm taking some time off." Jonathan hailed taking time off. Natasha raised an eyebrow. "That definitely wasn't in any of the articles I read. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think." "Maybe not." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Your mother told me about the panic attacks." Jonathan went very still. "She told you what?" "Last month, when I brought her groceries. She was worried about you." Natasha's voice was gentle, non-judgmental. "She said you'd been pushing too hard, that success was eating you alive from the inside. She had no right to. She's your mother. She loves you." Natasha turned to face him fully. "And she's scared she's going to lose you the same way she lost your father." The words hit like a physical blow. Jonathan's father had died of a heart attack at 42, stressed and overworked, chasing the American dream until it killed him. Jonathan had been 17, angry and determined never to be that vulnerable again. "I'm not my father. Aren't you?" Natasha's dark eyes searched his face. "When's the last time you took a real vacation? When's the last time you did something just because it made you happy?" Jonathan wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't remember the last time he'd done anything for pure joy. Everything in his life served a purpose. Networking, deal-making, empire-building. "That's different. I have responsibilities." So did he. Natasha's voice was quiet, but firm. "Your father worked himself to death trying to provide for you and your mother, and now you're doing the exact same thing, just with bigger numbers. I'm trying to build something lasting, something secure. For who?" The question hung in the air between them. "You don't have a wife, kids. Your mother has everything she needs. So who are you really doing this for, Jonathan?" He didn't have an answer. Or rather, he had an answer he didn't want to examine too closely. "Why do you care?" he asked instead. Natasha was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I remember who you used to be, before you decided that being enough wasn't enough." She moved closer and he caught the scent of her skin, something warm and clean, like sunshine and vanilla. "You used to laugh, Jonathan, really laugh. You used to lie in the grass and point out shapes in clouds. You used to believe that being happy was more important than being important. We were kids. Kids don't understand how the world really works, don't they?" Natasha reached out, her fingers brushing his arm so lightly he might have imagined it. Or maybe adults just forget what really matters. The touch sent fire through his veins. Jonathan looked down at her hand on his arm, at the contrast of her dark skin against the white of his t-shirt, and felt something crack open inside his chest. "Natasha, I should go." She pulled her hand back abruptly, as if she just realized what she was doing. "I need to shower before work. Have dinner with me tonight." Jonathan, "Not a date," he said quickly, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Just friends catching up. I'll cook. Nothing fancy." She studied his face, and he held his breath, waiting. "You remember how to cook? Some things you don't forget." He smiled, the first real smile he'd felt in months. "My mother's spaghetti recipe. You always said it was better than any restaurant." That was a long time ago. "The recipe hasn't changed." Another long pause. Then, softly, "What time? 7? 7? She turned toward the gate, then looked back. "But Jonathan?" "Yeah? Don't read more into this than there is. I'm not the girl who used to wait by the window for you to come home anymore." And as she walked away, he wondered if that girl was exactly who he'd been looking for all along. Some memories taste exactly like home. Jonathan had forgotten how therapeutic cooking could be. He stood in his mother's kitchen at 6:30, sleeves rolled up, hands working through the familiar motions of making her famous spaghetti sauce. The onions sizzled in olive oil, filling the air with warmth, while garlic and herbs waited patiently on the cutting board. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't racing through deal points or market projections. There was only this moment, this simple act of creating something with his hands. His mother watched from her wheelchair by the kitchen island, her eyes bright with a contentment he hadn't seen since before her illness. "You're adding too much oregano," she said with a smile that took any sting out of the words. "It's been a while," Jonathan admitted, laughing as he put half the herbs back. "Think I remember why I stopped cooking for myself. Because you got too important for simple pleasures." Eleanor's tone was gentle but knowing. Jonathan paused, wooden spoon halfway to his mouth for a taste. "Something like that. She's special, you know." "Natasha," his mother's voice carried the weight of years. "She's been like a daughter to me since you left. Visits every week, brings groceries when I'm stubborn about accepting help, listens to me ramble about the garden. Mom, I'm not meddling, sweetheart. I'm just saying that some people are worth coming home for." Eleanor reached over and squeezed his arm. "And some people are worth staying home for." Before Jonathan could respond, the doorbell rang. His heart jumped to his throat. "I'll get it," Ruth called from the living room, but Jonathan was already wiping his hands on a dish towel. "No, I've got it." He opened the door and forgot how to breathe. Natasha stood on the porch in a simple sundress, the color of deep emerald, her hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She'd applied just enough makeup to enhance her natural beauty without hiding it, and when she smiled, he felt something fundamental shift in his chest. "You clean up nice," she said, taking in his dark jeans and button-down shirt. "So do you." The words came out rougher than he'd intended. "You look Different from my running clothes, she supplied with a laugh. Beautiful, he finished and watched her cheeks flush. Thank you. She held up a bottle of wine. I brought this. It's from that little vineyard outside town. I wasn't sure what went with spaghetti, but it's perfect. Jonathan stepped aside to let her in, catching a hint of her perfume as she passed. Something light and floral that made him think of summer evenings and promises whispered in the dark. Mrs. Hale. Natasha's face lit up as she spotted his mother in the kitchen. Oh, darling, you look lovely. Eleanor's eyes misted slightly. Doesn't she look lovely, Jonathan? She does, he agreed, his voice soft. Dinner was easy in a way Jonathan had forgotten meals could be. They sat at the small table in the breakfast nook, candles flickering between them, talking about everything and nothing. Natasha told stories about her students, 8-year-old Marcus who insisted dinosaurs still existed somewhere, little Riley who wrote love letters to her pet hamster, the twins who spoke their own secret language during math class. You love them, Jonathan observed, watching the way her whole face transformed when she talked about the children. They're honest in a way adults forget how to be, Natasha said, twirling spaghetti around her fork. When Marcus tells me my dress is pretty, he means it. When Riley says she's scared about her parents fighting, she trusts me to help. There's no agenda, no politics, just truth. That must be refreshing. It is. She looked at him curiously. Do you miss that? Simplicity. Jonathan considered the question while taking a sip of wine. In his world, every conversation served a purpose. Every lunch was a negotiation. Every dinner a potential deal. When was the last time someone had spoken to him without wanting something? I didn't realize I missed it until now, he said honestly. What's it like? Your life in New York? Busy, successful, lonely. The last word slipped out before he could stop it, and he saw Natasha's expression soften. The articles never mentioned lonely. The articles never asked the right questions. Jonathan set down his wine glass, studying her face in the candlelight. What about you? Do you ever think about what might have been if you'd left Millbrook? Something flickered in Natasha's eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. I did leave. For a while. You did. College in Boston. Then graduate school. I had a job lined up at a private school in Manhattan. She was quiet for a moment. I was all set to conquer the world, just like you. What happened? Life happened. Natasha's voice was carefully neutral. My mother got sick. Cancer. I came home to help, and by the time she paused, gathering herself. By the time she passed, I realized I didn't want to leave anymore. This place, these people, they needed me, and I needed them. I'm sorry, I didn't know about your mother. She died 5 years ago. Natasha's smile was sad but genuine. But she was happy at the end, said she was proud that I chose love over ambition. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Jonathan thought about his own choices, the relationships he'd sacrificed for success, the connections he'd severed in pursuit of something he couldn't even name anymore. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. Giving up your plans? Do you regret yours? She countered. All that ambition, all that success, are you happy, Jonathan? The question hit him like a physical blow. Happy. When was the last time he'd even considered whether he was happy? His life was measured in achievements, in acquisitions, in the respect of people whose opinions he wasn't even sure he valued. I don't know, he admitted, the words barely above a whisper. I don't think I remember how to be happy. Natasha reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The touch was warm, grounding, and Jonathan felt something inside him that had been wound tight for years finally begin to loosen. Maybe, she said softly. You just need to remember what happiness felt like before you decided it wasn't enough. Jonathan turned his hand palm up beneath hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as if no time had passed at all. He looked into her dark eyes and saw something that made his breath catch. Not pity, not judgment, but understanding, like she could see straight through all the walls he'd built, and still found something worth caring about. Natasha, he started, but she shook her head. Don't, she whispered. Don't say whatever you're about to say. Not yet. Why? Because I'm not ready to hear it. Her fingers tightened in his. And you're not ready to mean it. And in that moment, with her hand in his and candlelight dancing between them, he realized that coming home had never been about his mother at all. The best conversations happen when the world is sleeping. Jonathan couldn't let her leave. They'd finished dinner an hour ago, but neither of them had made a move to end the evening. Now they sat on the porch swing his father had built 20 years ago, the gentle creak of chains mixing with the symphony of crickets and the distant sound of the lake lapping against the shore. Natasha had kicked off her sandals, tucking her legs beneath her, and Jonathan found himself mesmerized by the way the moonlight played across her skin. She'd always been beautiful, even as a gangly 12-year-old with scraped knees and grass-stained clothes. But this woman beside him was something beyond beautiful. She was luminous, grounded, achingly real in a way that made his chest tight. "Do you remember the summer before senior year?" she asked, her voice soft in the darkness. Jonathan's throat constricted. Of course he remembered. How could he forget the summer that had changed everything between them? "The night of the meteor shower," he said. "We stayed up until 3 in the morning, lying on that old blanket in your backyard." Natasha's smile was visible even in the dim light. "You kept making wishes on every single star that fell. You said it was scientifically impossible to wish on that many meteors. You told me science was for people who didn't believe in magic." She turned to face him fully. "What did you wish for that night, Jonathan?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 15 years of history. He remembered that night with perfect clarity, 17 years old, lying beside his best friend, who had somehow become the most important person in his world, watching the universe put on a show just for them. He'd wished for time to stop, for college applications to disappear, for a way to stay in this moment forever, with Natasha's hand in his and her laughter floating up toward the stars. Instead, he'd gotten a full scholarship to Columbia, and the beginning of the end of everything that mattered. "I wished for you," he said quietly, the truth finally escaping after all these years. Natasha went very still. "Jonathan, not just that night. Every night for months before I left." He turned to face her, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I was 17 and terrified and completely in love with my best friend, and I didn't know how to tell her." "You never said anything. How could I? You had your whole future planned out. College, graduate school, that job in Manhattan you'd been dreaming about since we were 14. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by his own teenage cowardice. "I was afraid if I told you how I felt, I'd mess everything up, that you'd have to choose between me and your dreams. So you made the choice for me." There was no accusation in her voice, just quiet understanding that somehow hurt worse than anger would have. "I thought I was protecting you. From what? From me. From settling for small-town life when you were meant for so much more." Jonathan laughed bitterly. "Ironic, isn't it? I left to become someone worthy of you, and lost you in the process." Natasha was quiet for so long, he thought she might not respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You want to know what I wished for that night?" Jonathan nodded, not trusting his voice. "I wished you would kiss me." She met his eyes directly. "I'd been waiting for you to see me as more than just your friend for months. That night lying there under all those falling stars, I thought maybe, why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was 17 and terrified and completely in love with my best friend." She echoed his words back to him with a sad smile. "And because 2 weeks later you told me about Columbia and how excited you were to start fresh somewhere new. The way you said it, it was like you couldn't wait to leave everything here behind." "Not everything," Jonathan said fiercely. "Never you. But you did leave me behind. You went to college and met new people, had new experiences. I got maybe 3 phone calls that first semester. Then a Christmas card, then nothing." Natasha's voice remained steady, but he could hear the old hurt underneath. "You moved on. I never moved on." The words came out rougher than he'd intended. "I told myself I had, convinced myself that what we had was just childhood nostalgia. But I never stopped thinking about you, Natasha. Every major decision I made, every relationship I tried to build, you were always there in the back of my mind, the standard I measured everything against." "Jonathan, don't." "Don't what? Tell you the truth?" He shifted closer, close enough to catch the scent of her perfume, to see the way her pulse fluttered in her throat. "I spent 15 years trying to become someone impressive enough to deserve you, only to realize that the person you loved was the boy I used to be." "Was," Natasha said softly. "Past tense." The words hit him like a physical blow. "And now?" She studied his face in the moonlight, her expression unreadable. "Now I see glimpses of him sometimes, in the way you laugh at my stories about the kids, in how gentle you are with your mother, in the way you looked when you were cooking tonight like you'd remembered something you'd lost." "He's still here," Jonathan said urgently. "That boy, the one who believed in magic and made wishes on falling stars, he's still here, Natasha. Buried under years of ambition and fear, maybe, but still here. I know." She reached up and touched his cheek, her palm warm against his skin. "But I'm not the same girl who waited by her window for you to come home from college that first Thanksgiving. I'm not the same girl who cried herself to sleep when you stopped calling. I know you're not. Jonathan covered her hand with his, holding it against his face. You're stronger now, more beautiful, more yourself than you've ever been, and I'm still completely in love with you. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Natasha's breath caught, her eyes wide in the moonlight. You can't just come back here and say things like that, she whispered. Why not? Because you're going to leave again. Her voice broke slightly. Because this is just a visit for you, a nostalgic trip down memory lane before you go back to your real life, and I can't go through that again, Jonathan. I won't. What if I stayed? The question surprised him as much as it did her. He hadn't planned to say it, hadn't even consciously thought it until the words left his mouth, but as soon as they were spoken, he knew they were true. What? What if I stayed? Here, in Millbrook? What if I sold the company and came home for good? Natasha pulled her hand away from his face, her expression shifting from surprise to something that looked almost like panic. You don't mean that. I do. And he did. Sitting here with her, feeling more like himself than he had in years, the idea of going back to Manhattan felt impossible. I could work remotely, or start something new. Small scale, sustainable. The kind of life that doesn't require sacrificing everything that matters. Jonathan, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in 15 years. He reached for her hands, but she pulled them away. Natasha, listen to me. No. She stood abruptly, pacing to the porch railing. You can't just waltz back into town and rearrange your entire life because of one dinner and some childhood memories. This isn't about childhood memories, isn't it? She turned to face him, and he could see tears glittering in her eyes. You're running from something, Jonathan. I can see it in your eyes, hear it in your voice. This isn't about love, it's about fear. The accusation stung because part of him wondered if she was right. But as he looked at her standing there in the moonlight, beautiful and strong and achingly familiar, he knew that whatever had brought him home, what he felt for her was real. Maybe it started that way, he admitted, but it's not fear keeping me here now. It's hope. Hope for what? For us. For the life we could have built if I'd been brave enough to stay the first time. He stood and moved toward her, slowly, giving her time to back away if she wanted. For the chance to be the man you deserved all along. Natasha closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. And what if you wake up tomorrow and realize you've made a terrible mistake? What if you get bored with small-town life and decide the city wasn't so bad after all? Then I'll deal with the consequences. Jonathan stopped just out of reach, his voice soft but certain. But I won't spend another 15 years wondering what might have been. And in that moment, with tears on her cheeks and moonlight in her hair, he realized that some chances only come once in a lifetime. Some scars run so deep they change the shape of your soul. Natasha didn't come home with him that night. She'd stood there on the porch for another hour, talking in circles about practicality and consequences, and all the reasons why his sudden declaration was impossible. But Jonathan had seen the way her hands trembled when he'd spoken about staying, had caught the flash of longing in her eyes before she'd hidden it behind logic. When she finally left, she'd paused at the garden gate and looked back at him with an expression that made his chest ache. Don't make me any more promises you can't keep, she'd whispered. Then she was gone, leaving him alone with the weight of everything he'd said and the terrifying possibility that he'd meant every word. Now, 3 days later, Jonathan found himself walking the familiar path to Elm Street without conscious thought. His mother was napping, tended by Ruth, and the silence of the house had become unbearable. He needed to see Natasha, needed to understand why she was so afraid of letting him back in. Her house was a small craftsman cottage, painted pale yellow with white trim, surrounded by the most gorgeous garden he'd ever seen. Roses climbed the front porch posts, and vegetable beds lined the walkway with military precision. It was exactly the kind of home he would have expected her to create. Beautiful, nurturing, completely self-sufficient. He found her in the backyard, kneeling among the tomato plants with dirt under her fingernails and tears on her cheeks. Natasha? She looked up, startled, then quickly wiped her face with the back of her hand. Jonathan, what are you doing here? You've been crying. He moved closer, concerned. What's wrong? Nothing. I'm fine. She turned back to the tomatoes, her movements sharp and defensive. Just frustrated with these plants, they're not growing the way they should. Jonathan knelt beside her, studying her profile. The plants looked perfectly healthy to his untrained eye, but Natasha was attacking them like they'd personally offended her. Talk to me, he said softly. Please. About what? Her voice was tight, controlled. About why you're really afraid to let me stay. About why you build these walls every time I get too close. Jonathan reached out and stilled her hands, which were shaking as she worked. About why a beautiful, incredible woman like you has never let anyone into her heart. Natasha went very still. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. You don't know what you're asking, she said finally. Then tell me. She pulled her hands free and sat back on her heels, her dark eyes distant and full of pain. You want to know why I've never been with anyone? Why I'm 32 years old and have never let a man touch me the way you touched my heart the other night? Jonathan nodded, his throat tight. Because 15 years ago my best friend told me he loved me under a sky full of falling stars, and then he disappeared from my life like I'd never mattered at all. Her voice was steady, but he could see the old hurt underneath. Because I spent 4 years waiting for him to call, to write, to remember that I existed. Because I turned down dates and job opportunities and chances at happiness because some stupid part of me believed he'd come back. Natasha, I'm not finished. She held up a hand and he fell silent. Do you know what it's like to be 17 years old and convinced that you've found your person, only to discover that you were just practice? A small-town stepping stone to bigger and better things? The words hit him like physical blows. That's not what you were. Wasn't I? Natasha's laugh was bitter. You left for Colombia and never looked back. You built this incredible life, dated beautiful women, became everything you dreamed of being. And I stayed here and waited like some pathetic heroine in a tragic romance novel. You went to college too. You said you had opportunities. I did. I went to Boston, got my degree, even had a job lined up in Manhattan, just like I'd always planned. Natasha's voice grew quieter, and then my mother got sick and I came home to help. But that's not why I stayed. Why then? Because I was a coward. The admission seemed torn from somewhere deep inside her. Because every time I thought about leaving Millbrook, about starting over somewhere new, all I could think about was how it felt when you left, the way the world just emptied out, like all the color had been drained away. Jonathan felt sick. I never knew. How could you? You never called to ask. Natasha's eyes finally met his, and the pain he saw there nearly broke him. Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't even that you left. It was that you made it look so easy. Like everything we'd shared, all those years of friendship, and that night when I hoped. She trailed off, unable to finish. I was 18 years old and terrified, Jonathan said desperately. I didn't know how to balance loving you with wanting to make something of myself. I thought if I stayed, I'd end up like my father, dead at 40 from the stress of never having enough. So you chose ambition over love. I chose what I thought was best for both of us. Without asking me what I wanted, Natasha stood, brushing dirt from her knees. That's the thing you never understood, Jonathan. I didn't need you to become someone important. I already loved who you were. The words hung between them, devastating in their simplicity. And now? He asked quietly. Now I know better than to build my life around someone else's choices. Natasha wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking fragile despite her strong words. I've built a good life here, a safe life. I teach children who think I hung the moon. I have friends who value me for who I am, not what I might become. I have this house, this garden, routines that don't depend on anyone else's whims. It sounds lonely. Lonely is better than heartbroken. Her voice broke slightly on the words. I learned that lesson once, I won't learn it again. Jonathan stood, every instinct screaming at him to reach for her, to pull her into his arms, and promise that this time would be different. But something in her posture told him that touching her right now would be exactly the wrong thing to do. What if I could prove that this time is different? He asked instead. How? I don't know yet. But Natasha, he waited until she looked at him. I'm not the same boy who left you behind, and what I feel for you now isn't some nostalgic fantasy. It's real, and it's deeper than anything I felt at 18. Words are easy, Jonathan. You've always been good with words. Then let me show you with actions. Give me a chance to prove that I'm not going anywhere. Natasha studied his face for a long moment, and he could see her warring with herself, hope battling against years of carefully constructed defenses. I can't, she whispered finally. I'm sorry, but I can't take that risk again. Not with you. And in that moment, looking at the woman who had shaped his heart when they were both too young to understand love's true weight, he realized that some walls are built not to keep people out, but to keep broken hearts from shattering completely. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. Jonathan sat in his rental car outside Natasha's house for 20 minutes after she'd gone inside, her words echoing in his head like a judgment he couldn't escape. I already loved who you were. The boy she'd loved had been reckless with precious things. He'd taken her heart, the most generous, trusting heart he'd ever known, and abandoned it without a backward glance. 18 years old and convinced he was protecting them both, when all he'd really been protecting was his own fear of not being enough. Now, 15 years later, he finally understood the true cost of that choice. When he finally drove home, he found his mother reading in her chair by the window, the afternoon light making her silver hair glow like a halo. "How did it go?" she asked without looking up from her book. "She told me why she's never been with anyone." Jonathan sank into the chair across from her, feeling suddenly ancient. "It's because of me, because of how I left." Eleanor closed her book and studied his face. "And how does that make you feel?" "Like the worst kind of coward." Jonathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I thought I was being noble, Mum. I thought I was setting her free to have the life she deserved. And instead I taught her that love means abandonment, that caring about someone means they'll eventually leave." His voice cracked. "She's been alone for 15 years because of me." "Jonathan," his mother's voice was gentle but firm, "you were 18 years old. Children make mistakes, even when they're trying to do the right thing. This wasn't just a mistake. This was devastating for both of us." Jonathan ran his hands through his hair, frustrated by his own past stupidity. "How do I fix something like this? How do I prove to her that I'm not the same selfish boy who broke her heart?" "You can start by not making this about you." Jonathan looked up, startled by the sharpness in her tone. "What? This guilt you're wallowing in, it's still selfish, sweetheart. You're so focused on how terrible you feel about what you did that you're missing the point entirely." Eleanor leaned forward. "Natasha doesn't need your guilt. She needs your consistency." "I don't understand." "She needs to know that you see her, really see her, not just as the girl you left behind or the woman you want to win back, but as the person she is right now. She needs to know that you value what she's built, what she's become." His mother's eyes were wise and kind. "And most importantly, she needs to know that you're not going to disappear the moment things get difficult or complicated." Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. "So, what do I do?" "You stay. Not because you want to prove something, but because you genuinely want to be part of this community, part of her world. You show up consistently and without expectation." Eleanor smiled. "And you be patient, even when it feels impossible." The next morning, Jonathan woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He drove to Millbrook Elementary just as the early summer session was ending, parking across the street where he could see the playground without being obvious about it. At 11:30, children began streaming out of the building, their voices high and excited, as they ran toward waiting parents and caregivers. And there was Natasha, standing in the doorway with a group of second graders clustered around her legs, all talking at once. She wore a simple blue sundress and comfortable sandals, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look hardly older than her students. But it was the way she listened to each child with complete attention, the way she knelt down to their eye level and treated their concerns with genuine respect, that made Jonathan's chest tight with something deeper than attraction. This was who she'd become in his absence, not the girl who'd waited by her window, but a woman who'd built a life of purpose and meaning, a woman who'd taken her natural gift for nurturing and turned it into something that mattered. He watched her lock up the school and walk toward her car, her movements graceful and unhurried. When she spotted him across the street, she stopped, her expression unreadable. Jonathan got out of his car and approached slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. "I'm not here to argue or make more confessions," he said when he was close enough to speak normally. "I just wanted to ask you something." "What?" Her voice was guarded but not hostile. "What do you need for your classroom? Supplies, books, equipment, whatever would make your job easier or help your kids learn better?" Natasha blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "What? I want to help. Not because I'm trying to buy your forgiveness or prove anything about my feelings, but because I can see how much you care about those kids, and if there's something I can do to support that work, I'd like to." "Jonathan, I can't accept." "Please." He held up a hand. "Let me be clear about what this is and what it isn't. This isn't a grand romantic gesture. This isn't me trying to insert myself into your life. This is me wanting to contribute something positive to a community that shaped who I am, to support work that matters." He paused. "And yes, it's also me wanting to understand the woman you've become by seeing the world through your eyes." Natasha studied his face for a long moment. "You really want to know what my classroom needs?" "I really do." "Books?" she said finally. Good books that represent all kinds of families, all kinds of kids. The school's library budget gets cut every year, and half my students don't have books at home. What else? Art supplies, musical instruments, a classroom garden where we can teach science through growing things. Her voice grew stronger as she warmed to the topic. Field trip money so we can take the kids to museums and theaters and places they'd never get to see otherwise. Jonathan found himself smiling at her passion. That sounds amazing. It's expensive. The district doesn't have funding for extras like that. But I do. Natasha's expression shifted, becoming wary again. I told you I can't accept. What if it wasn't a gift? What if it was a foundation? Jonathan's mind was racing, ideas clicking into place. A community foundation that supports education and enrichment programs for local kids. Completely transparent, with a board of local residents making decisions about how funds get allocated. You'd do that? I'd love to do that. I've been looking for meaningful ways to use my resources, and this feels right. He meant it. For the first time in years, he could see a path towards something that mattered beyond profit margins. Would you consider being on the board, helping design programs that actually serve the kids who need them most? Natasha was quiet for so long, he thought she might refuse. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with something that might have been hope. You'd really stay? Even if nothing ever happens between us romantically? You'd build a life here just because it's the right thing to do? Yes, Jonathan said without hesitation. Natasha, I spent 15 years building an empire that ultimately meant nothing because it was built on the foundation of running away from what mattered most. If I can spend the next 15 years building something that actually helps people, something that honors what this place gave me, he shrugged, that feels like a pretty good use of a life. What about your company? I can run it remotely, or sell it, or find partners who share the vision of business as a force for good. Jonathan smiled. Turns out being successful doesn't have to mean being absent. The board would want to meet with you, Natasha said carefully. Ask questions, make sure this isn't some kind of publicity stunt. I'd expect nothing less. And there would have to be clear boundaries. Professional boundaries. Of course. Natasha nodded slowly. Okay, let me talk to Principal Hendricks and some of the other teachers. If they're interested, maybe we could set up a meeting. Thank you. Jonathan felt something loosen in his chest. For giving me the chance to do something worthwhile with my life. Don't thank me yet. You haven't met the school board. Natasha's smile was small, but genuine. They're going to eat you alive. Good, Jonathan said and meant it. I've been too comfortable for too long. As she drove away, Jonathan stood on the sidewalk outside the elementary school and felt something he hadn't experienced since he was a child. The satisfaction of doing something simply because it was right. And for the first time in 15 years, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was becoming someone worthy of the boy he used to be. Love isn't found in grand gestures. It's built in quiet moments. 3 weeks had passed since Natasha's confession in the garden, and Jonathan was learning that earning forgiveness was harder than making money had ever been. He'd started small, bringing his mother fresh flowers from the farmer's market every Tuesday, the same day Natasha always stopped by for their weekly visit. Not to see Natasha, he told himself, just to make his mother smile. But when he heard Natasha's familiar laugh drifting from the kitchen one Tuesday afternoon, he found his feet carrying him there before his mind could object. "Oh, honey, you should have seen his face," his mother was saying, her eyes bright with mischief. 3 grown men in expensive suits, and none of them could figure out how to work the coffee machine. Sounds about right, Natasha replied, and Jonathan could hear the smile in her voice. Remember when we were kids and he couldn't figure out how to use the can opener? I was 9, Jonathan said from the doorway, unable to stop himself from joining the conversation. Both women turned toward him, and he felt his breath catch. Natasha wore a simple green blouse that brought out the warmth in her dark skin, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful and completely at ease in his mother's kitchen, like she belonged there. And now you're 36 and probably have assistants to open cans for you, Natasha teased, but there was no malice in it. Actually, I've been learning to cook again. Jonathan leaned against the doorframe, not wanting to intrude but reluctant to leave. Made dinner for Mom 3 nights this week, and only burned it twice, Eleanor added with obvious pride. Improvement, Natasha acknowledged, and something in her expression softened. What did you make? Last night was grilled chicken with vegetables. Tonight I'm attempting pasta from scratch. Jonathan felt suddenly nervous, like a teenager asking someone to prom. There'll probably be leftovers if you wanted to stay. The invitation hung in the air between them. Natasha glanced at his mother, who was trying very hard to look innocent. I should probably head home, Natasha said carefully. I have papers to grade. Of course. Jonathan tried to hide his disappointment. Maybe another time. But as she gathered her purse and kissed Eleanor goodbye, Natasha paused at the kitchen door. Jonathan? Yeah? Next Tuesday, when you bring the flowers, maybe you could pick up some of those strawberries your mum likes, the ones from the Johnson farm stand. It was a small thing, barely even a request, but the way she said it, like she was trusting him with something precious, made his chest tight. I can do that. Good. Her smile was small but genuine. She's been craving them for weeks, but they're expensive and she's too proud to ask for them herself. After she left, Jonathan sat with his mother in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the garden. She still cares about you, Eleanor said quietly. I know. Jonathan's voice was rough. That's what makes this so hard. I can see her wanting to trust me, but fighting against it every step of the way. Can you blame her? No. That's what makes it worse. He leaned back in his chair. How do I prove I've changed without pushing too hard? How do I show her I'm not going anywhere without making promises she can't believe yet? You do exactly what you've been doing, sweetheart. You show up, consistently, without expectation. Eleanor reached over and patted his hand. Love isn't a destination, Jonathan. It's a practice. The next Tuesday, Jonathan arrived at the farmer's market early, determined to find the best strawberries money could buy. He wandered through the stalls, sampling peaches and admiring tomatoes, until he found the Johnson stand. Those are beautiful, he told Mrs. Johnson, pointing to a flat of perfect red berries. Best of the season, she agreed, then studied his face more closely. You're Eleanor Hale's boy, aren't you? Heard you were back in town. Yes, ma'am. How's your mama doing? Haven't seen her at church lately. Jonathan felt a pang of guilt. His mother had always been active in the community, but her illness had kept her home more often than not. She's struggling some days, but she's tough. Mrs. Johnson nodded knowingly. Tell her I've been praying for her, and you take care of her, you hear? That woman raised you right, even without a man around to help. I will. As Jonathan drove home with strawberries and flowers in the passenger seat, Mrs. Johnson's words echoed in his mind. His mother had raised him right, but somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten the lessons she'd taught him about what really mattered. He found Natasha's car in the driveway when he arrived home, which shouldn't have made his heart race the way it did. She and his mother were sitting on the front porch, sharing a pitcher of iced tea and talking in low voices. Perfect timing, Eleanor called out as he approached with his purchases. Look what Jonathan brought. Natasha's face lit up when she saw the strawberries. Oh, they're gorgeous. Mrs. Johnson always has the best fruit. She asked about you, Mum. Said she's been praying for you. That sweet woman. Eleanor's eyes misted slightly. I should call her. Actually, Jonathan said, settling into the third porch chair, I was thinking maybe we could drive out there this weekend. If you're feeling up to it, I'd like to see the farm and you could visit with her properly. I'd love that. Eleanor beamed at him. Natasha, you should come with us. Remember how we used to pick berries there when you were little? Jonathan tensed, waiting for Natasha to make an excuse, but she surprised him. I haven't been out there in years, she said thoughtfully. It might be nice to see how it's changed. So you'll come? Eleanor pressed. If Jonathan doesn't mind the company. I'd love the company, Jonathan said, perhaps too quickly. I mean, it would be nice to have you there. Natasha looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her expression. Not trust exactly, but maybe the possibility of it. Okay, she said quietly. It's a date. The words hung in the air, and Jonathan saw her realize what she'd said. Her cheeks darkened with embarrassment. I mean, it's a plan, not a date. Just a thing we're doing. I know what you meant, Jonathan said gently, but his heart was hammering against his ribs. Thank you for giving me the chance to be part of something normal. That evening, as Jonathan attempted his pasta-from-scratch experiment, he found himself humming for the first time in years. The noodles were slightly overcooked, and the sauce could have used more salt, but when his mother praised his effort and saved some for Natasha to try tomorrow, he felt like he'd accomplished something meaningful. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant about the quarterly board meeting he was supposed to attend via video call Thursday morning. For a split second, Jonathan felt the familiar pull of obligation, the weight of expectations and responsibilities that had driven his life for so long. Then he thought about strawberries and farmers' markets, and the way Natasha's face had softened when she'd accidentally called their weekend trip a date. He typed back, "Reschedule the meeting. Family emergency." It wasn't exactly true, but it wasn't exactly false either. His real family, the people who actually mattered, needed him here. And for the first time in 15 years, that felt like the most important job in the world. And as he watched the sun set over the garden his father had planted 30 years ago, he realized that coming home wasn't about the place. It was about remembering who he was when he wasn't trying to be anyone else. Sometimes the sweetest moments come from the simplest pleasures. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect summer weather that made everything feel possible. Jonathan stood in his mother's kitchen, packing a cooler with sandwiches and cold drinks, his hands steadier than they'd been all week. Today felt important in a way he couldn't quite name. "You're nervous," Eleanor observed from her wheelchair, watching him fuss over the lunch preparations. "I'm not nervous. Sweetheart, you've reorganized that cooler 3 times. You're nervous." Her smile was knowing and gentle. "It's sweet." "It's not a date," Jonathan said, though his pulse quickened as he heard a car door slam outside. "It's just a thing we're doing. Like she said." Eleanor wheeled herself toward the front door. "Well, your just a thing is here." Jonathan took a deep breath and followed his mother outside, his heart doing something complicated when he saw Natasha walking up the path. She wore a simple sundress in pale yellow that made her skin glow, and her hair was pulled back in a loose braid that showed off the elegant line of her neck. She looked effortlessly beautiful and completely at ease in a way that made his chest tight. "Morning, Mrs. Hale," she said, bending to kiss Eleanor's cheek. "How are you feeling today?" "Like a woman about to spend the day at her favorite place on earth," Eleanor replied. "And you look lovely, darling." "Doesn't she look lovely, Jonathan?" "She does," Jonathan agreed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "You look beautiful." Natasha's cheeks darkened with a blush that made him want to say it again, just to see that reaction. "Thank you," she said softly. "Should we get going?" Mrs. Johnson said the berries are at peak ripeness this week. The drive to the farm was filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences. Eleanor regaled them with stories of berry-picking expeditions from their childhood, while Jonathan found himself stealing glances at Natasha in the rearview mirror, memorizing the way sunlight played across her face. "Remember when you two got lost in the corn maze?" Eleanor was saying. "Gone for 3 hours and we finally found you asleep under the apple trees, covered in berry juice and completely filthy." "We weren't lost," Natasha protested, laughing. "We were exploring. You were 8 and convinced you could find buried treasure," Jonathan added. "I was just trying to keep up with you. And now look at you, the one who actually found treasure." The comment was casual, but something in Natasha's tone made Jonathan glance at her again. She was looking out the window, her expression thoughtful. "Money isn't treasure," he said quietly. "I'm beginning to understand that." When they arrived at Johnson Farm, Mrs. Johnson greeted them like old friends, embracing Eleanor warmly and insisting they take the best berry-picking baskets. "You take care of this sweet lady," she told Jonathan and Natasha, "and don't let her overdo it in this heat." The berry fields stretched out before them like something from a postcard, rows upon rows of plants heavy with fruit, the air sweet with the scent of summer. Jonathan pushed his mother's wheelchair along the grass paths, while Natasha walked beside them, pointing out the best clusters of berries. "These ones," she said, carefully plucking a particularly perfect berry and holding it out to Eleanor. "Try this." Eleanor bit into the strawberry and closed her eyes with pleasure. "Oh, that's heaven." "Here," Natasha said, offering another berry to Jonathan. "Taste summer." Their fingers brushed as he took the strawberry from her hand, the contact sending warmth shooting up his arm. The berry was perfect, sweet and tart, and bursting with flavor that tasted like childhood and possibility. "It's incredible," he said, not taking his eyes off her face. "Thank you." They spent the morning wandering the fields, filling baskets and sharing stories, and laughing at Eleanor's determination to pick berries, despite being confined to her wheelchair. Jonathan found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years, the constant tension in his shoulders melting away as he watched Natasha help his mother reach the perfect berries. "You're good with her," he said, during a quiet moment when Eleanor was dozing in her chair under the shade of an oak tree. "I love her," Natasha said simply. "She was like a second mother to me when I needed one most. When your mother was sick? Before that, actually, when my parents were going through their divorce." Natasha's voice grew soft with memory. "I was 14 and angry at the world, and your mother would let me come over after school and just exist. No questions, no judgment, Just hot chocolate and a safe place to be. Jonathan felt something twist in his chest. I never knew about the divorce. It happened right after you left for college. Dad moved to California. Mom stayed here with me. Natasha picked at the grass beside Eleanor's wheelchair. Your mother helped me understand that sometimes people love each other, but still can't make it work. Is that what you think about us? The question slipped out before he could stop it. That we love each other, but can't make it work. Natasha looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes serious. I think love isn't always enough. I think sometimes timing matters more than feelings. And what about now? Is the timing better now? I don't know, she admitted. I want to believe it is. But I'm scared, Jonathan. I'm scared of trusting you and having you decide that this life isn't exciting enough. I'm scared of falling for you again and watching you walk away when something shinier comes along. Jonathan moved closer, close enough to catch the scent of her perfume mixed with strawberries and sunshine. What if I told you that nothing shinier exists? That I spent 15 years chasing something I thought I wanted, only to realize that everything I actually need has been right here all along? I'd say you're good with words. You always were. Then let me show you instead of telling you. Jonathan reached for her hand, and when she didn't pull away, he felt hope bloom in his chest. Let me prove that I'm not going anywhere. Not this time. How? However you need me to. For as long as it takes. Natasha's breath caught, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the weight of 15 years and all their unspoken feelings hanging between them. Natasha, he started, but she shook her head. Don't, she whispered. Don't say anything else right now. Just let me enjoy this moment without thinking about what comes next. So they sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching Eleanor sleep peacefully in the shade while the summer breeze carried the scent of berries and the distant sound of children laughing in the farm's play area. When Eleanor woke, they made their way back to the farm stand, where Mrs. Johnson insisted on giving them extra berries and a jar of her homemade jam. You come back anytime, she told Eleanor. And you two, she looked pointedly at Jonathan and Natasha, you take care of each other. On the drive home, Eleanor dozed again in the back seat, tired but happy from their adventure. Jonathan found himself driving slower than necessary, reluctant to end the day. Thank you, Natasha said suddenly, for including me, for letting me be part of this. Thank you for coming. It wouldn't have been the same without you. Your mother was so happy today. I haven't seen her smile that much in months. She loves you, Jonathan said. She always has. And I love her. Natasha paused, then added quietly, I've missed this, being part of a family. The words hit Jonathan like a revelation. Not just that she'd missed his family, but that she'd been alone all these years. No romantic relationships, no family of her own, just her work and her quiet life, and the occasional visit to his mother. Natasha, he said carefully, can I ask you something? Okay. Are you happy? Really, truly happy with your life the way it is? She was quiet for so long, he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought I was. For a long time I convinced myself that contentment was the same as happiness. She looked out the window at the passing countryside. But being with you these past few weeks, I remember what it feels like to want something more, and that terrifies me. Why? Because wanting things means risking disappointment, and I'm not sure I'm brave enough to risk that again. What if you didn't have to be brave alone? Jonathan asked. What if we could be brave together? When they pulled into the driveway at home, Natasha helped him get Eleanor settled for a nap, then lingered in the kitchen while he put away the berries. I should go, she said, but she made no move toward the door. Should you? Jonathan set down the basket and turned to face her. Or do you want to stay for dinner? I'm making that pasta again, and I promise it'll be better than last time. Natasha smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he'd seen from her since he'd been back. Okay, she said, but I'm helping this time. No more burning the sauce. As they worked side by side in his mother's kitchen, chopping vegetables and arguing about seasoning, Jonathan felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't even realized was missing. This was what he'd been searching for in every boardroom and every success. Not the achievement, not the recognition, but the simple pleasure of sharing ordinary moments with someone who mattered. And as Natasha laughed at something he said, her face bright with joy in the golden afternoon light, he realized that the best treasures aren't found, they're chosen every single day. Some truths can only be whispered in the dark. The storm came without warning. Jonathan and Natasha had been cooking together for an hour, their conversation flowing as easily as the wine they'd opened to go with dinner. Eleanor was napping peacefully upstairs, and the kitchen felt warm and intimate, filled with the scent of garlic and herbs and the quiet contentment of two people who had finally stopped pretending they didn't want to be exactly where they were. Then the first flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it shook the windows. "Oh, no," Natasha said, moving to peer out the kitchen window as the first fat raindrops began to fall. "I should get home before this gets worse." "You could wait it out," Jonathan suggested, trying to keep his voice casual. "These summer storms usually pass quickly." But even as he spoke, the rain intensified, turning from drops to sheets of water that hammered against the glass. Another flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and thunder rolled overhead like a freight train. "I don't think this one's passing any time soon," Natasha said, hugging herself as she watched the storm rage outside. Jonathan moved to stand beside her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Stay," he said quietly. "Please. The guest room is always made up, and I don't want you driving in this." Natasha looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. Fear, maybe, but not of the storm. "Jonathan, just to be safe," he added quickly. "Nothing more than that." She nodded slowly. "Okay, just until it passes." But the storm didn't pass. If anything, it intensified as the evening wore on, with winds that howled around the house and rain that came down in torrents. They ate dinner by candlelight when the power flickered and died, their conversation quieter now, more intimate in the dancing shadows. "I should check on Mom," Jonathan said when they'd finished eating, but when he went upstairs, he found Eleanor sleeping peacefully, despite the chaos outside. "She's fine," he reported when he came back down, sleeping like a baby. "She always could sleep through anything," Natasha said with a fond smile. "Remember that thunderstorm when we were 10? She slept through the whole thing while we huddled under blankets in the living room, convinced the house was going to blow away." "You were terrified," Jonathan remembered, settling back into his chair across from her, "but you kept telling me not to be scared." "I was trying to convince myself as much as you." Natasha's smile turned wistful. "I always felt braver when I was taking care of someone else. Is that why you became a teacher?" "Partly." She traced the rim of her wineglass with one finger. "I love children. Their honesty, their resilience, the way they see magic in ordinary things." She paused. "I used to think I'd have kids of my own someday." "Used to? Hard to have kids when you've never—" She trailed off, her cheeks darkening with embarrassment. "Natasha," Jonathan said gently, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Is it really just because of me? The reason you've never been with anyone?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 15 years of unspoken truth. Natasha was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. "Not just because of you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because of what you taught me love could be." Jonathan's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "When we were 17, lying under those stars, I thought I knew what love was. Sweet and innocent and safe." Natasha finally looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the candlelight. "But the way you looked at me that night, the way you made me feel like I was the most precious thing in the world, I realized I didn't know anything at all." Thunder crashed overhead, but neither of them flinched. "And then you left," she continued, "and I spent months feeling like I'd been broken in half. Every boy who asked me out, every man who showed interest, they all felt like pale imitations of what I'd felt with you." "Natasha, I kept waiting," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "First for you to come back, then for someone to make me feel that way again. And eventually I realized that what we had was once in a lifetime, and I'd already had my chance." "So, you just gave up on love entirely?" "I gave up on settling for less than what I knew love could be." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Even if it meant being alone forever." Jonathan felt something crack open in his chest, a pain so deep it took his breath away. "God, Natasha, I'm so sorry. I never meant for—" "I know." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You were 18 and scared and trying to do the right thing. But Jonathan, do you have any idea what it's like to be 32 years old and have never been touched? To lie awake at night, wondering if you'll die, never knowing what it feels like to be wanted by someone who loves you?" The rawness in her voice broke something fundamental inside him. Jonathan stood abruptly, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. "Look at me," he said urgently. "Please look at me." When she raised her tear-stained face to his, he cupped her cheeks gently in his hands. "You are wanted," he said fiercely. "You are so wanted it takes my breath away. You are beautiful and brilliant and generous, and the strongest person I've ever known. Any man would be lucky to have you look at him the way you're looking at me right now. But no one else matters, Natasha whispered. That's the problem. It's always been you, Jonathan. Only you. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they were brave enough to cross. Outside, lightning flashed again, illuminating their faces in stark black and white. Natasha, Jonathan said carefully, what are you saying? I'm saying I've waited 32 years for the right person to touch me, to love me, to be my first everything. Her voice shook, but her eyes never left his. And I'm tired of waiting for you to realize that person has always been you. Jonathan's world tilted on its axis. I want you to see me, she whispered. Really see me. Not as the girl you left behind or the woman you feel guilty about, but as someone who has loved you through 15 years of separation and 1,000 different kinds of heartbreak. I do see you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I see you, and I love you, and I've never wanted anything more than I want to be worthy of what you're offering me. Then stop talking, Natasha said, her hands coming up to cover his, and kiss me like you mean it this time. Jonathan searched her face for any sign of doubt, any hesitation, but all he saw was certainty and trust, and a love so deep it made him dizzy. Are you sure? He asked one last time. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. So Jonathan leaned forward and kissed her, soft and gentle and reverent, pouring 15 years of regret and longing and desperate love into the contact. Natasha melted into him with a soft sound of surrender, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with all the passion she'd been holding inside for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. I've loved you since we were 17 years old, and I'm going to love you until the day I die. Then prove it, Natasha said, her voice steady, despite the tears in her eyes. Stay with me tonight. Make me yours and let me make you mine. Outside the storm raged on, but inside the warm circle of candlelight, two hearts that had been broken 15 years ago finally began to heal. And in that moment, with thunder rolling overhead and love burning bright between them, they both knew that some things are worth waiting a lifetime for. 1 year later, the morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Eleanor Hale's kitchen, casting dancing patterns on the worn wooden table where 3 coffee cups sat waiting. It was Tuesday, Strawberry Day, and the ritual had become as natural as breathing. Jonathan stood at the stove, scrambling eggs with the easy confidence of a man who had finally learned that the simplest skills were often the most precious. His hair was longer now, less corporate, and there was a lightness in his shoulders that spoke of burdens finally set down. The panic attacks that had plagued him in New York were a distant memory, replaced by the steady rhythm of a life lived with intention rather than ambition. The Johnson farm called, Natasha said from her seat at the table, her voice warm with morning drowsiness. The strawberries are particularly good this week, something about the rain we had last weekend. She wore one of his Columbia t-shirts and nothing else, her hair a beautiful mess around her shoulders, and when she smiled at him over her coffee cup, Jonathan felt the same jolt of electricity he'd experienced that stormy night a year ago when everything changed. We should take Mom out there again, he said, sliding perfectly golden eggs onto 3 plates. She's been talking about wanting to make jam. She's been talking about a lot of things lately, Natasha said with a knowing look, including how nice it would be to have grandchildren someday. Subtle your mother is not. Jonathan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. She's been dropping hints since we got engaged. I think she's planning to start leaving baby magazines around the house. Let her, Natasha said, holding up her left hand to catch the light streaming through the window. The engagement ring, his grandmother's ring, simple and perfect and full of history, sparkled on her finger, like captured starlight. I don't mind. For the first time in my life, those dreams feel possible. The sound of Eleanor's wheelchair in the hallway interrupted their quiet moment, but neither of them minded. Eleanor had been a part of their love story from the beginning, and her presence in their morning routine felt like grace. Good morning, you two, Eleanor said as Jonathan helped her into her usual spot at the table. Don't you both look disgustingly happy this morning? Every morning, Natasha corrected, leaning over to kiss Eleanor's cheek. I wake up happy every morning now. Good, Eleanor said with satisfaction. It's about time. They ate breakfast in comfortable conversation, discussing Eleanor's doctor's appointment later that week and the new children's garden Natasha was planning for the school. The conversation was ordinary, domestic, wonderfully boring, in the way that real life was when you were with the right people. After Eleanor settled in the living room with her morning talk shows, Jonathan and Natasha walked hand in hand through the garden that had become their sanctuary. The vegetables were thriving under their joint care, and the flower beds that Eleanor had planted decades ago bloomed with renewed vigor. "I got a call yesterday," Jonathan said, as they paused beside the tomato plants that were heavy with summer fruit, "from Richard Morrison at the company." Natasha tensed slightly. Morrison was the CEO who had taken over Jonathan's daily operations when he'd stepped back to focus on strategic oversight from Millbrook. What did he want? "To congratulate me. The company just had its most profitable quarter in 5 years. Jonathan's smile was wry. Turns out removing the paranoid, controlling micromanager from daily operations was good for business. Who knew? And how does that make you feel? It was a question Natasha asked often, gently encouraging him to sit with his emotions rather than pushing them aside in favor of action. Therapy, another suggestion from his wise fiancée, had taught him the value of honest introspection. "Proud," he said after consideration, "and relieved. I built something sustainable, something that doesn't need me to hover over it to succeed. That feels freeing." "Good." Natasha squeezed his hand. "Because I have news too." "Oh?" "Principal Hendricks offered me the position of curriculum director for the whole district." Jonathan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Natasha, that's incredible. You'd be amazing at that. It would mean more responsibility, more time away from the classroom, more administrative work." Her expression was thoughtful, considering, but also more opportunity to impact educational policy, to make real changes that help kids district-wide. "Do you want it?" "I think I do," she said slowly. "For the first time in my life, I feel brave enough to want something bigger, because I know that no matter how big my dreams get, I'll always have home to come back to." She meant him, Jonathan realized, with a jolt of pure joy. He was her home now, the way she had always been his, even when he'd been too foolish to understand it. "Then take it," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Take every opportunity, chase every dream. I'll be right here cheering you on. Promise?" "I promise," he said, sealing the vow with a kiss that tasted like summer mornings and forever. Later that afternoon, they drove Eleanor to her weekly appointment with Dr. Chen, the oncologist who had become more friend than physician over the months of her treatment. The news was cautiously optimistic. Her latest scans showed continued improvement, and talk of remission was no longer wishful thinking. "I want to plan a party," Eleanor announced as they drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook. "A celebration of life party. Good food, good music, all the people I love in one place." "Mom, you don't need an excuse to throw a party," Jonathan said, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "This isn't about an excuse," Eleanor replied firmly. "This is about gratitude. A year ago, I thought I was dying alone, with my son a stranger, living a life I didn't recognize. Now look at us. I have my boy back. I have a daughter who loves me, and maybe, if I'm very lucky, I'll live to see grandchildren who climb the same trees their father climbed." Natasha reached back to squeeze Eleanor's hand. "You'll see grandchildren," she said with quiet certainty. "Jonathan and I want a whole house full of children. We want chaos and laughter and little feet running through that garden. We want to give them the childhood we had," Jonathan added, "the kind where love is abundant and dreams feel possible." That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Jonathan and Natasha sat on the front porch swing, watching fireflies begin to dance in the gathering dusk. Natasha was curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, and Jonathan marveled at how perfectly she fit there, like she'd been designed specifically for that space. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up New York, the fast life, all that power and excitement?" Jonathan considered the question seriously. A year ago, he would have been offended by the suggestion that small-town life required sacrifice. Now he understood that she wasn't questioning his choices, but marveling at them, the way he sometimes marveled at the path that had brought him home. "Never," he said finally. "Not for a single second. That life was impressive, but it wasn't mine. This life, this love, this quiet happiness, this is who I was always supposed to be, even when I'm grumpy in the mornings, even when I steal the covers, even when I make you watch romantic movies and cry at all the happy endings." "Especially then," Jonathan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Although, for the record, you're the one who cries at the movies. I just provide tissues and emotional support. You cried at the Notebook last week. That was allergies." "It was not allergies, Jonathan Hale. You sobbed like a baby when Noah read to Ali. Fine, he conceded, laughing, but only because it reminded me of us. Old couple, still choosing each other every day. Is that what you want? Natasha asked, tilting her head to look at him. To be old together. I want to be everything together, Jonathan said seriously. Young and reckless and madly in love, middle-aged and busy with kids and careers, but still making time for each other. Old and grey and sitting on this same porch, telling our grandchildren about the summer we fell in love twice. Twice? Once when we were 17 and thought we knew everything, and once when we were older and brave enough to risk everything for a second chance. Natasha was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke her voice was thick with emotion. I used to think second chances were just fairy tales, that real life didn't work that way. What do you think now? I think some love stories are worth waiting for, she said, turning to face him fully. I think some people are worth building a life around, and I think coming home isn't about a place. It's about finding the person who makes you feel like yourself. As if summoned by their conversation, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but steadily with her walker. Room for one more on that swing, she asked. They made space for her between them, and the three of them sat in comfortable silence as night settled over Millbrook. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of children playing and the soft murmur of neighbors chatting on their own porches. This is perfect, Eleanor said softly. This moment, right here. If I could freeze time anywhere, it would be here. We don't need to freeze it, Natasha said, reaching across Eleanor to take Jonathan's hand. We can just live it one perfect moment at a time. And as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Jonathan thought about the boy who had once made wishes on falling stars, desperate for love he was too young to understand. That boy had gotten everything he'd wished for, just not in the way he'd expected. Sometimes the best gifts came disguised as losses. Sometimes you had to lose everything to learn what really mattered. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, love gave you a second chance to get it right. In the distance, the church bells chimed 9 o'clock, and somewhere in the neighborhood, a screen door slammed and someone called their children inside for the night. It was the soundtrack of small-town life, ordinary and precious, and exactly where Jonathan Hale belonged. He was home, finally, completely, forever home. The end. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have made the same choice? What would you have done in Natasha's place? Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.